Boomers want to know, is it true? Gen X want to know, does it work? And Gen Z asks, is it beautiful? There's truth in all of those things. I think people, but I'm finding that Gen Z is less interested in the truth question. They're more asking the question, is there a practical wisdom, a change that happens in my life?
The Mission Matters podcast is a partnership between 1615 and Missio Nexus, who have a shared passion to mobilize the people of God to be a part of His mission.
Hello and welcome to the Mission Matters podcast. I'm Matthew Ellison, and of course, I am joined by my good friend and co-host, Ted Esler. Ted, greetings, brother.
Hey, Matthew. Good to see you. We actually just did a podcast.
That's right.
Recording. I'm wearing the same shirt, and I feel guilty about that. I feel like I should change my shirt, but people should know we stacked these all on one day.
That's right.
During our last episode, Mark accidentally came in early, and it was really fun to see him just for a few minutes in the previous episode. So
it was fun. Yeah. So I've got my salmon colored shirt on. My wife would say pink. I say salmon, but it's the same shirt as the last episode as well. So forgive me.
Saying that it's salmon and not pink doesn't help you.
Well, today we are joined by Mark Matlock. You just heard his voice, a visionary leader known for his deep commitment to the next generation. As the executive director of Urbana, one of the world's largest and most influential student missions conferences, Mark sits at the intersection of global mission and cultural change. He is a seasoned strategist, author, and researcher who has spent decades, Mark, right?
Yeah.
Helping young people navigate the complexities of life and leadership with wisdom and purpose. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, it is great to be with you. Yeah, I was just adding up the date of my first project with Barna, and it was 30 years ago. So yeah, it really has been decades. Yeah.
Well, one of the things I love about Mark, and it really came out just a few weeks ago, he was at our CEO retreat for Missio Nexus, is he's got, there's a breadth of experience and research in all this back there. But let's go back before that. You've been engaged in next generation ministry for a long time. What drew you first to ministering to young people or making this kind of a focus in your lifelong ministry of decades, as Matthew was sure to point out?
Yes,
sorry, Mark.
Yes,
sorry.
Decades.
Sorry,
no,
brother.
it's all. It's all right. It's weird to, like, when you're in the youth ministry space, you're kind of like always like a perpetual adolescent in a way. And like, I've had to be forced to grow up a little bit.
That'd be a good research question. Why do youth ministry people always think they're younger than they are? Because that is a universal.
It is a universal problem. Yeah. And it's not just that we believe we are, it's like we act that way too. It's like,
yeah.
It's, we shoot our mouths off when we're not supposed to and all kinds of wonderful things. Well, to be honest, I didn't want to go into youth ministry. I went to Biola University and was studying intercultural studies there with some legends in the missiological world, and thought I was going to be an anthropological consultant with Wycliffe. That was kind of the trajectory. And I actually went to Urbana and had maybe like an opposite experience that a lot of people that go, I'm being called into cross-cultural ministry. I went to Urbana and sensed the Lord telling me, hey, you've wanted to be a missionary, but you haven't asked me what I want you to do. And I actually walked away saying, Lord, I opened my hands up and maybe this isn't the path you have for me. And I found myself working with young people just kind of by accident. It wasn't accident, it was providence, really, because God was just bringing people into my life saying, hey, come speak to our youth group, come do something for our youth group. And that connected me to a guy named Dawson McAllister, who at the time was doing these large format discipleship conferences. And he invited me to come and join his crew. And so literally 6 months after Urbana, I was moving to Dallas, Texas, and to work in youth ministry, which was not the direction that I thought I was going in my life. And so it was very stunning to me. And I got married the year after, and I told my wife, hey, look, I know you think it's really cool that I'm a youth minister and all that. I get all this free pizza, but the reality is I surrendered to missions. And if, God should open that door again. That's where I'm going. And I need to know if we're going to get married, you have to be committed to that. And she said, yeah, if that's what God wants us to do, that's where I'll go. So when this Urbana assignment came up, I was actually kind of resistant to it. And she was like, hey, do you remember before we got engaged and you said, Lord, like, I'll do whatever you want me to. She goes, I think this was that moment that God prepared us for, was coming back into InterVarsity as, a missionary and doing this work. So it was an interesting shift, but a little different path for me than most.
So Mark, I'm smiling because I had that same conversation with my wife when we started to date. I remember the park we were at, and I just felt this incredible call to cross-cultural ministry. And I said, I don't know where God's going to lead me, but I'm thinking about moving overseas. And if that's something you can be a part of, then let's move ahead. If not, and of course she responded affirmatively. And I never ended up on the mission field either, but I maintained my role in mobilization and cross-cultural ministry.
Yeah, the way God integrated that was really unusual, because then not too many years later, I was invited on the board of the seed company and started getting really involved in, advocating for Bible translation. And it was just really interesting the way God, and I started putting this in front of teenagers at our conferences, the Great Commission work. And and I would get calls from mission agencies saying, hey, we just inducted somebody and they said they felt their call to be a missionary at one of your conferences. So God kind of used it in a different way than I would have expected.
Yeah. I was going to say, I really appreciate your decades, 3 decades in youth ministry. I was youth pastor for 4 years at a church. And I remember when I took the calling, my wife and I said, let's at least stay 4 years. Let's see a group of freshmen all the way through graduation at least, because there's this constant turnover in youth ministry. And then God led me into youth missions. And so I was able to live that out even further. But I think so many times those who enter into youth ministry, and I'm not trying to slight anybody, but it is a stepping stone for real ministry, for moving up the food chain, so to speak, in ministry. And I think it's some of the highest, most profound, and should be prioritized ministry of all.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, once I got into youth ministry, I was one of those I'm in youth ministry for life kind of guys, who's like, I'm not seeing it as a stepping stone. There's a whole movement kind of around that in the 70s and 80s. And so I was definitely in that camp. So I was even stunned when God called me out of youth ministry in 2016 and was like, wait a minute, first the missions and then this. And every time God's kind of called me not knowing where I was going to go. But I had to leave what I was doing. Some people, there is a wisdom about, don't go without knowing where you're going. Like God doesn't call you away from something to nothing. But in my case, that's always been the case. It's always been a go without knowing. And that's been part of the faith journey, is walking away from something that was really comfortable and I've had numerous occasions like that throughout my life, but it's always been that way with me. Everybody's got a different pattern, I think, in the way God works in our lives. But youth ministry is a fantastic, dynamic ministry that we need more of. Yeah.
One observation I would make about cross-cultural workers serving overseas is they're often focused on adults, especially if they're doing church planting ministry. You don't plant churches with teenagers, typically, is the thinking. And I'll tell you, that's a little short-sighted.
It's very short-sighted.
When I left the Balkans, it was 1999, made a trip back there about 5 years later, and all the teenagers that we had overlooked were literally leading the church at this point, just 5 years later. And it happened super fast, and it happened because of adults not making it long-term in their discipleship. But if I were to do things over again, I definitely would have worked more on that youth ministry side of things than I did when I was there doing this adult activity of church planting. So
when I travel internationally, I'm always connecting with younger people and younger generations. I don't try, it just happens. And I find there's more openness, receptivity. It's almost easier to make that cross-cultural transition because they're a part of that kind of global, hyper-connected. So there's more cultural sharing with younger generations that allows you to kind of, I guess, have commonality and basis of relationship. I found, at least.
Well, that's probably embedded a little bit in the culture of a younger generation, right? The cross-cultural skills that they have. So let's head there. Tell us a little bit about some of the research findings that you've seen with Gen Z, and what are some larger picture observations, kind of along that line of the cross-cultural, that might interest our listeners.
Yeah. So, in addition to being the executive director of Urbana, I'm also a senior fellow with the Barna Group. So tracking with a lot of research that we're doing, we several years ago did a global study of Gen Z that we did for World Vision, Biblica, and Alpha, and several other partners. And what we found was that Gen Z has more in common with each other globally than they do the generation above them in their own country. And so that made me just kind of stop and go, what is God doing? What is God preparing, that there is generational commonality globally that can be leveraged? And I think there is just a really interesting opportunity for that. At the same time, Gen Z is arriving at the same time globally, even though other cultures may not be ready for it. So where in the United States, we might be ready for some of the shifting values that Gen Z holds, or a little, even though we may not agree with them, we might be more tolerant of them. In other countries, it's very disruptive. And so as I'm traveling across Africa, you see a lot more disruption. So in my global travels, I'm really seeing Gen Z be an issue in a lot of locations in terms of people going, we don't know how to bridge this divide. And it's a really strong opportunity in terms of that. So that's one aspect of it. In the United States specifically, where we've been doing a lot of our further research, we've really been looking at the openness to spirituality. And one of the things that we're finding is that Gen Z is very pluralistic, but they're not pluralistic in a sense that they are, well, I believe in this deity or I believe in that deity. What they're really, it's very practical pluralism. They're looking for something that works. And this is a little bit of an indictment, I think, on the church right now, is that as I'm talking to Christians, they're not always able to articulate like how Jesus is actually shaping and changing them, and helping them be counterformational to the world. And so a lot of young people are going, I'm not seeing really any difference between the people in my church and the people outside of the church. So they're going, is there a practical, is this a practical change? So they're searching tarot cards, they're looking at crystals and all kinds of different practices, some occultic, some new age, some other religions, some of it just dabbling in other practices like mindfulness, meditation, that aren't necessarily deity specific, but they're looking for something that actually helps them navigate life. And we know as followers of Jesus that nobody helps you navigate life better than Jesus. Unfortunately, that isn't always the testimony that people are seeing as they're engaging Christianity right now.
So is it a shift in, like, I would say for my generation, the question was, is it true? Is Christianity true?
Yeah.
Is that still a question? Or is that, you're talking about, does it work, as opposed to, is it true?
Yeah. And, my colleague, James Chong here at InterVarsity, he has a great kind of generational framework, which is, boomers want to know, is it true? Gen X want to know, does it work? And Gen Z asks, is it beautiful? There's truth in all of those things. I think people, but I'm finding that Gen Z is less interested in the truth question. They're more asking the question, is there a practical wisdom, a change that happens in my life? And the beauty part of it that James talks about, I think he wrote this, several years ago, but it's even coming out more with this mid-Z group that is kind of emerging out of the pandemic, where their relationship with, like, who do I trust? Who do I have confidence in? Who do I relate to? Is not based on human relationship, but symbolic relationships. And so beauty is one practical expression of this works because it's beautiful, it's elegant, it reflects a designer. Even if intuitively they're not thinking that consciously, they are reading it as such. And so there is a relationship between those things. At the same time, they're not looking for slick either. So they're not looking for hyper polishedness, which is some of the boomer excellence that we see in church. Sometimes is a turnoff because it's almost too slick and it doesn't have enough realness to it as well. So there is an aesthetic piece that's symbolic in terms of, can I trust this? And then but is it practically going to help me?
Mark, I've heard you share that there are some signs of renewal, perhaps, maybe even revival in Gen Z.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could talk about some of those indicators. What are they? What's going on?
Yeah, it's like I've had a lot of opportunities to interact with fellow colleagues like Carrie Newhoff about this data. And I like the way Carrie actually has summed up the data as Gen Z is both in revival and retreat. And so there's kind of like, based on what you're experiencing, you may have a different like perception of it, but there is revival happening with Gen Z. They are connecting with God in a really powerful way. But then there's also like a real like stark emptiness and hollowness. And I recently wrote a book, Faith for the Curious, that looked at spiritual curiosity in Americans. And what that research kind of revealed is that we have two things happening in our country right now with those that are unchurched. We have people that are post-church, post-Christian culture, people that Christianity is in the rear view mirror for them. And then we also have people that Christianity is in the front window. And so they haven't yet encountered real Christianity yet. Maybe what I find with pre-Christians in the US is that their only understanding of what a Christian is that you voted for Donald Trump. That's about the extent of their understanding of what a real Christian is. When you actually sit down and help them meet Jesus, they're very interested in that. And one of the things just across America in general is that people are looking to spirituality as an upgrade. They're looking for more. It's like the image of God is in them and they're experiencing some of it, but sin is holding it back. It's keeping it cloudy and dark and limited. And so they're wanting more. And so they've realized money, education isn't completely doing it. So they're going, maybe spirituality. So I'll try yoga. I'll try numerology. I'll try crystals. I'll go see a psychic reader. I'll check my tarot cards every day. They're looking to different pathways to try. I'll try, chanting or fasting or sweat lodges or whatever the case is. They're looking to spirituality as something to help them get more of what they're wanting in life. It's not an existential, I'm lost, I'm looking for meaning and purpose. It's, I want more of what I've already got. How do I get more intimacy? How do I get more compassion? How do I get more generosity? How do I experience greater sense of justice? How do I get more creativity? And they're turning to spirituality for that. The problem is, because a lot of people in the church have not really let Jesus transform them in all of these areas, we don't always have the best example of that to offer. Or when I've talked to Christians about how do you explain how Jesus helps you experience more of this, they don't know because they've not trusted Jesus for that in their own life. So they kind of got they've got enough of a relationship with Jesus that they know they're saved and they know that, he makes a difference in their life and he's the Lord of their life, but they haven't really even themselves tapped in to the renewal power of Jesus in their life to totally experience the upside down kingdom and really live in a transformed way. And that's what's going on is the world's going, well, I'm looking for more. Is Christianity got it? Yeah, I already tried that. Or I've never explored Christianity. I'm interested in what it has to offer. But when they get there, do they see it? And so it's a real interesting challenge to us because I think we've experienced a discipleship crisis in the church that the pandemic kind of exposed. And I think we're all, and this isn't pointing fingers at anybody, it's a collective thing, where we're all going, wow, we haven't really formed people well. And that's the moment that we're in. That's the opportunity.
Well, I can tell you this year, Missio Nexus it's always got an annual theme. This year, our annual theme that we've been working off of is discipleship.
Mm-hmm.
Super hard. Evangelism was easier as a topic. And I've already got half of next year planned out on planning churches. But discipleship is really hard to kind of wrap the theme around. I mean, like right now, who are the top authors, speakers, writers on discipleship?
Yeah, I would be looking to Pete Scazzaro in Emotionally Healthy Discipleship, Drew Hune, who's running that right now. They're doing some incredible work. And John Mark Comer, I think, is also doing some fantastic work around these areas of formation. Ruth Haley Barton, another person that I would recommend people read. In fact, I actually did a project with Pete where we were trying to contextualize emotionally healthy spirituality and relationships for young people. And what I found in the process of this was the church is impatient when it comes to discipleship. We have so developed programs that work on 6-week cycles that we aren't patient enough to really allow formation to happen. As we were running these test programs, youth pastors were like, give me the curriculum. I'll start tomorrow. And we're like, no, you have to go through the curriculum. You have to be formed by it so that you know how to do it. In fact, Pete even made me spend a year going through the material before I could even begin to contextualize it for teenagers. And I was like, at first I was like, really? Like, I've read your book. I get this concept. I've read Richard Foster, I've practiced spiritual disciplines. And he's like, no, you have to go through this in community and then you'll really understand it. And you know what? He was right. And he was willing to patiently wait a year for me to get started on the project because he knew. My wife was like, this is the best job you've ever had. You're getting paid to become emotionally healthy. But it was really stunning to me when we started then taking it to churches. One, youth pastors they were like leaving their position before they even finished their part of the journey, before they could implement it. So we have some structural systemic issues we have to work through discipleship wise, I think, to really get where we need to go. So, because I can't form somebody if I'm not formed, The
way I like to say it is discipleship doesn't scale. It's very hard to programmatically launch it and have a campaign about it and to do the typical kinds of things we see happening. Particularly, we talk about the big, fast-growing churches, and we kind of applaud these big, huge churches that are growing. But discipleship is like, it doesn't fit that model very well. So it's a challenge.
What you're saying is spot on. When Jesus, saw the crowds they were harassed and they were helpless, the prayer wasn't, hey, we need to figure out a better strategy or a better message, or we need bigger budgets. It was all, we need more laborers in the field. It was a capacity issue. We need more bodies in the field to do the work. And so what we've done with our kind of Western mindset, especially our American mindset of innovation and bringing things to scale, is we've tried to figure out how to get past that capacity issue of we need bodies doing the work. Because I can only Jesus only took on 12. We all have capacity limits with how many people we can actually enter into that kind of journey with. And so we need the labor problem. So, I know you know this, but it really exposes the crisis that we're in right now. We have to be able to take a deep breath and say, let's do the hard work. Let's take time and we'll see the fruit, in time, but not try to get there too quickly.
I was saying, I was reading F.B. Meyer this morning. I love the old dead guys. Well, they're not dead. They're with, Jesus now in spirit, at least. They'll get new bodies one day, as we will. But he said that God does not bestow his best gifts upon the casual or hasty comer and goer. To be much alone with God is the secret to knowing him and influence with him. And I think not only in discipleship, but even in just personal formation, we want this open package, mix ingredients approach to becoming a disciple of Jesus. And you mentioned that it takes time. It takes the investment of our lives.
Let's shift gears a little bit here. Let's talk a little bit about Urbana.
Yeah.
Mark, you and I have talked about this in the past, but you kind of blew the doors off my thinking about Urbana when you shared with me this research report done in the 40s about why the student volunteer mission had kind of lost steam.
Yeah.
This is not fair to do to you, but can you encapsulate that in kind of short form, what you read there, and how that impacted your thinking about Urbana?
Yeah, there were some real interesting systemic issues, culturally that were happening as the student volunteer movement was in decline. And there was a dissertation that was written by William Beam in 1942 that was kind of exploring the decline of the student volunteer movement. And I read it, and it was literally like, you could have taken this off the front pages today, right? It was things like, hey, there's so many churches growing outside of the Western context. Western missionaries aren't needed anymore. Like the Great Commission is basically done. That was like 1942, right? And he's talking about the end of the 30s. There was tension with social justice issues versus the gospel, and there wasn't clarity around those two things and the proper way that those were expressed. So there was tension going on there. So a lot of things of that nature that were very similar, and even the issues that they talked about, things like racial equality and reconciliation, inequity, colonialism. These were all issues that they were struggling with in the 30s related to the expansion of mission. Well, these are some of the things at the forefront of what we were facing with college students today. And I was like, wow, this is interesting. So what I'm learning is that there are times when there are declines and there are indicators of declines. And this happened again as we were wrapping up the 60s. Yet then there was a surge in mission mobilization that went through the 70s into the 80s that was also another, unprecedented moment. And so, and in the 1940s, you had Urbana start a kind of a new wave coming out of World War II, other movements that were taking place at that time. So I think we're ripe for something now, but I'm wondering if it's really going to be a Western experience, because these are the history of the Western missions movement. And if we're going to see it be more polycentric, where we see the centers of mobilization coming in the global South. I don't know. I'm just kind of watching it and trying to ride the wave that God is, that's swelling, and seeing Gen Z, with this global hyperconnectivity. I'm just like, I don't know that God's going to give guys like us the imagination for the future, but we have wisdom and resources that we need to make sure we make available to the younger generation. And so I'm really excited about things like the young leaders gathering that Ellison is putting on, trying to help identify global young leaders and figure out how we as older generations can really help invest in them and prepare them, on. And that's one of the really cool things about Mid-Z. A lot of us that are older, when we think about younger people, we tend to think of the millennials. And the millennials, for good reason, were a little bit hostile toward older generations because we weren't real open to the changes that were happening. But what we're finding with this Mid-Z group, which is kind of like 24 to like 17, they're actually a generation of best practices. And what they're really looking for is things that work. And if you have something that works, they are interested in it. And so they're not challenging. If we're open to really honestly giving to them and investing in them, they tend to be more open to hearing from us. Whereas even just some that are a little bit older, like 29, 28, 31, they will tend to be a little bit more hostile toward older generations and frustrated by them. So even just within a few years' time, we're seeing that. I think part of it is because this generation, they know with artificial intelligence and data, they have access to all kinds of knowledge, but they don't know how to use it to get what they want out of life, the good life that they're looking for. And this is where I think we can help them.
That generation was kind of cut in half too by COVID, right?
Very much so. Yeah, COVID really kind of what marked that. But what we're finding in generational research right now is because of hyperconnectivity. It used to be generations were shaped by certain events that happened But now everything's kind of being experienced simultaneously and not necessarily visibly. So we're seeing language change, trends change. I mean, if you've seen this whole 6-7 thing that happened, a while back, it was like people are like, where did that come from? How did that even erupt, and how did it spread so quickly across younger generations? And it was like, that's the kind of moment that we're in where this stuff can kind of emerge and shape culture. So as demographers, people that study generations, we're having to really ask ourselves questions. How are we going to do this moving forward? Because it's not probably going to be those 15-year kind of cycles like it used to be. It's going to be a different kind of monitoring around how change happens across the generation.
So, Mark, Ted and I were at Urbana. We had a front row seat, so to speak. And so we got to witness what God was doing there. But I would love to hear from where you sit. What did you see God doing? Like, what are some of the standout highlights for you?
We just finished doing 13 focus groups where we sat down for 90 minutes with groups of students who attended Urbana several months after, trying to understand what their experience of it was. And what we're learning is really, really insightful. But probably the thing that we're hearing the most is people seeing themselves connected to the global church. So Urbana had a little different, I think, landed differently in terms of the sense of we as Westerners are going to other countries. There really was a polycentrism that we were trying to bring out without directly calling it out in the expression of missions and our global community as a church. So people were seeing themselves connected to the larger church, recognizing that there are people that are not a part of that it isn't ubiquitous, that there is a third of the population that doesn't have access to scripture, isn't likely to come across a Christian in their daily activity. So striking up that awareness was really, really critical. And also, kind of people seeing their whole life as missional, as opposed to there is a role of a missionary, and some students felt called to that role of being a missionary and crossing cultures, but others going, I just need to be thinking missional about everything 24/7. And even saying, I'm still going to do my job, but maybe I do it in another country. Maybe I do it in another location where I can be salt and light to my coworkers and the people around me. And then also recognizing the diaspora, and that a lot of the nations are literally, they're going to school with them right now. So we really, I think, just helped raise the level in terms of what people are experiencing. Out of the 7,000 attendees that we had at Urbana, 42% signed a commitment card to surrender their will for their life to God's will. And 1,000 of those 7,000 actually opted in for a follow-up coaching call to figure out what their next steps are. So those are some of the things that happened at Urbana, and we're just starting to kind of, we're working through those coaching experiences right now. We'll have more to share about that, as we get into the fall, because those are still in process. But it's been really, really remarkable just to kind of open up students' minds to what's going on. Just a lot, even though it's a diverse generation, a lot of them don't think about the breadth of cross-cultural awareness on a daily basis. So to me, if anything, the big win of Urbana was just helping all students, whether they feel called to the role of missionary, understand that they are a part of a global church, and that every part of the global church has strengths and weaknesses, and we need to be learning from each other. And I think that's a real interesting opportunity for Gen Z.
What do you, so you got, I have no idea what the future holds for you and Urbana together, but you just finished this big event. I'm assuming your calendar is opening up some. What are you spending?
Yeah,
what are you spending your time on now?
Beg to differ.
Beg to differ. I'm sure. What projects are you excited about?
Yeah, well, one of the things we did at Urbana is the students raised amongst themselves $330,000 for the International Fellowship of Evangelical Students. So I had a evangelical leader come to me and say, Mark, you need to plant an Urbana in every continent. And I said, that's not really what we do as a part of the IFES world. We work in fellowship with our brothers and sisters around the globe, doing the work that we're doing in context. And so we had a conference directors cohort at Urbana where we had about 45 to 50 leaders from across the globe that are saying, we want to be mobilizing in a way that Urbana is in our context, or they already are doing that. And so we all got together and we're building a community to learn how to do that better, to be able to share resources. And I'm actually going to be in Kenya meeting with several leaders like this across the African nations, talking about how we can do that and work collaboratively and learn from each other more coming up this summer. I'm hoping to do more of that as we're making our way toward Urbana in 28.
So what have we learned here today? There's a lot of great pieces that you surfaced, but something stuck out to me, Mark, and that is the question that Gen Z is asking, is it beautiful? And you mentioned there's truth in all of them. Is it true? All those pieces. But I was reminded of 1 Peter 2, I think 11, as sojourners and strangers, as exiles, keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable. The word translated is beautiful. Keep your conduct or your behavior beautiful so they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. And I got to tell you, that really struck me because someone very dear to me is really questioning her faith, deconstructing, if you will, is, turned off by some of the hypocrisy that we see in evangelicalism, rightly so. But it hit me like, am I behaving beautifully? Am I living in such a way that my behavior is beautiful and it's demonstrating God's goodness, His glory? So, man, that's a real takeaway for me, brother. I want to thank you for that. I probably heard you say it, but for some reason it stuck this time around. If we want to influence and help, reach a new generation, the next generation, our behavior has to be beautiful. So,
yeah, and helping a lot of that is we need to talk about what's beautiful, surround ourselves with what's beautiful. And that's one way to get out of our heads as evangelicals. A lot of us that are evangelical, we tend to be all about the belief, and it's all about right belief. And it's, I'm reading Mulholland's Invitation to a Journey, something I kind of reread every now and then. And it just struck me, we get into the, orthodoxy, right belief, the orthopraxy, right practice, but then there's orthocardia, which is right heart. And that's where the beauty shows up. And what I see in Christianity in America right now is we do not have orthocardia. We do not have a right heart. So we're able to, put our fist down and go, I have the right belief on this, but our heart is wrong. And, this goes back to, 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter. If I speak with the tongues of men and angels, all these different things. But if I don't have love, and love is a beautiful thing. And so once again, we see this and I just have to stop sometimes and go, wow, am I really appreciating the beauty around me? Because that's something I need to take in to really experience God around me so that I can introduce other people to God. And I think that's the other thing too, is I'm finding that the apologetic with this generation is less, let me convince you to believe in Jesus and show you the thinking, and more, let me introduce you to Jesus. And I think that's the power of the Alpha course, is that it's less about the apologetic of belief, and it's more the apologetic of knowing Jesus. And I think that's a really powerful transition and shift that many of us need to make.
It's a good word.
Stuff.
Good word.
Well, if you want to pick up Mark's latest book, he's actually got a bunch out, but Faith for the Curious, obviously in Amazon, you can pick that up and read that. Mark, I just want to say thanks so much for your leadership and for being on the call with us today.
Hey, I appreciate everything you're doing to keep us all connected and keep surfacing and sharing these ideas across our community. So thank you too for that.
Thanks, Mark.
Before you go, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. The Mission Matters podcast is a partnership of 1615 and Missio Nexus. Check out 1615.org and missionexus.org for more resources on the mission of God and the matters of the mission. The Mission Matters podcast is hosted by Matthew Ellison, president of 1615, and Ted Esler, president of Missio Nexus.